On October 14, 2023, at exactly 3:47 p.m., while poison dripped into my veins through a port installed 2 inches below my left clavicle during my 9th round of chemotherapy at Mount Sinai Hospital's cancer ward, room 1847 to be precise, I discovered through a carelessly left document on my bedside table that my wife Rebecca and my younger brother Daniel had gotten married in secret 6 weeks earlier, on September 2, 2023, at 11:23 p.m. in Atlantic City, New Jersey, while I was supposedly dying from stage IIB non-small cell lung adenocarcinoma. The marriage certificate, which Daniel had accidentally dropped from his Louis Vuitton messenger bag while pretending to visit his dying brother, showed they'd wed at the Borgata Hotel and Casino's wedding chapel, probably drunk on Dom Perignon champagne bought with my American Express black card that had a $500,000 monthly limit. The witness signatures belonged to Rebecca's divorce lawyer, Martin Schlesinger, who'd been preparing papers for after my death, and Daniel's accountant, Kevin Wu, who'd been helping them calculate exactly how much of my $87,493,221.78 fortune they'd inherit when the cancer finished what they assumed was its inevitable work. My name is Richard Goldstein. I'm 70 years old, former CEO of Goldstein Medical Industries, and this is the story of how I turned my wife and brother's ultimate betrayal into their complete annihilation, made my entire fortune disappear in 72 hours through 17 different international trusts, sent them both to federal prison for conspiracy and fraud, and lived to dance at my own 73rd birthday party while they thought I had 3 weeks to live. Let me paint you the complete picture of who I was before cancer and betrayal rewrote the entire narrative of my existence. I built Goldstein Medical Industries from absolutely nothing but a single patent in 1981, an improved cardiac stent that reduced rejection rates by 73% and restenosis by 81%. I was 29 years old, fresh out of Johns Hopkins with an MD I never practiced with and a PhD in biomedical engineering that I used every single day for the next 37 years. My father, Solomon Goldstein, a Holocaust survivor who'd watched his entire family murdered at Treblinka and rebuilt his life selling furniture in Flatbush, Brooklyn, lent me $25,000 at no interest, money he'd saved over 20 years of 16-hour days. He handed me the check with shaking hands and said simply, "Richard, you make something that saves lives, something that matters, unlike the schlock furniture I sell to people who don't need it." That first stent, the RGS-1 Cardiac Flow Optimizer, started as sketches on napkins at a diner on Delancey Street where I'd eat $3.99 early bird specials because that's all I could afford. The prototype was built in my apartment's kitchen, using equipment I'd bought at estate sales and rebuilt myself. I tested it first on pig hearts I got from a kosher butcher who thought I was insane, then on cadavers at Johns Hopkins where I still had connections. The first successful human implantation was on February 14, 1982, Valentine's Day, in a 67-year-old grandmother named Maria Santos who lived another 18 years and sent me Christmas cards every year until she died. That first stent led to 17 more patents over the next decade. The RGS-2 through RGS-7 series for different arterial applications. The Neural Flow series for treating strokes. The MicroStent series for pediatric applications that saved thousands of children with congenital heart defects. By 1995, we were manufacturing 32 different cardiac devices and had 340 employees working in a facility in Newark that I'd bought for $200,000 and turned into a state-of-the-art production center. By 2005, we'd expanded into neurological implants, joint replacements that lasted twice as long as competitors, and surgical instruments that became the gold standard in operating rooms worldwide. When Johnson & Johnson bought us in 2018 for $1.2 billion, I retained $347 million after investor payouts, employee bonuses. Every single person who'd been with us more than 5 years got at least $100,000, and taxes that made my accountant weep. But the real wealth wasn't in the bank accounts or stock options. It was in knowing that our devices were inside 4 million people worldwide, keeping hearts beating, blood flowing, joints moving. I had a wall in my office covered with letters from patients, photos of grandchildren they'd lived to meet, wedding dances they'd survived to perform. That was wealth. The money was just a scorecard, a way of measuring impact. I met Rebecca Sarah Winters at the American College of Cardiology conference in Boston on March 18, 1982, at exactly 2:15 p.m. during a break between sessions on tissue rejection in transplant recipients. She was presenting a paper on immunosuppressive protocols that was so elegant, so brilliantly conceived, that half the room of skeptical surgeons was taking notes and the other half was trying to find flaws that didn't exist. She had copper-red hair that caught the light like fire, wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and destroyed a room full of egos with data presented so clearly it was almost poetry. She had a PhD from Harvard in immunology, an MD from Yale School of Medicine, and a laugh that sounded like champagne bubbles rising. I know that's a cliché, but clichés exist because sometimes they're the only accurate description. I approached her after her presentation, my hands shaking like a teenager asking for a first date. "Dr. Winters, your paper on cyclosporin alternatives was brilliant. Would you perhaps like to discuss it over dinner? I have some questions about the T-cell suppression rates." She looked at me, this skinny Jewish kid with thick glasses and a cheap suit, and smiled. "You don't have questions about T-cells. You understood every word. You want to ask me out. The answer is yes, but only if we go somewhere that doesn't serve conference chicken." We went to an Italian restaurant in the North End, a tiny place with checkered tablecloths and a waiter who called everyone sweetheart. We talked until 3 a.m. about everything except medicine, Mahler's Symphony No. 5, which we both heard the Boston Symphony perform the previous week, Rothko paintings at the MFA that made us both cry for reasons we couldn't articulate, whether God existed in the space between heartbeats or in the silence between words. She ordered linguine with clam sauce and got it all over her expensive suit. I tried to look sophisticated ordering wine and pronounced Chianti so badly the waiter laughed. We were disasters, and we were perfect. We married on June 18, 1983, in her parents' garden in Westchester County, under a chuppah made from her grandmother's wedding dress and branches from the apple tree she'd climbed as a child. She wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her athletic frame. She'd been a swimmer at Harvard, almost Olympic level. I wore my father's suit from his own wedding in a DP camp in 1948, let out to accommodate my less austere appetite for my mother's cooking. Under the chuppah, just before the rabbi pronounced us married, she whispered, "Richard, promise me we'll always be partners, never competitors, never enemies, always on the same team." I promised. For 37 years, I thought I'd kept that promise. We couldn't have children, a cruel irony for two people who dedicated their lives to fixing human bodies, but couldn't fix our own reproductive systems. The first miscarriage came 6 months after the wedding, at 11 weeks. Rebecca bled through her scrubs during a surgery and didn't stop operating until the patient was closed. The second was at 14 weeks, on what would have been our daughter's due date. The third, at 9 weeks, happened while we were at a medical conference, Rebecca presenting through contractions she pretended were menstrual cramps. 3 rounds of IVF failed, each one costing $30,000 and a piece of Rebecca's soul. Adoption fell through twice, birth mothers who changed their minds, which we understood but which destroyed us anyway. By the time we accepted our childlessness, we were in our 40s, too set in our ways to be disrupted by diapers, too exhausted from building careers to build a family. Rebecca threw herself into research, eventually heading the transplant unit at NYU Langone, becoming one of the most respected transplant surgeons in the country. She could replace a heart in 4 hours, a liver in 6, give people second chances at life with hands that never trembled. I built the company, device by device, patent by patent, life by life. We traveled 63 countries over the years, collecting art that cost more than houses and memories that were priceless. We were happy, or I was too busy to notice we weren't. My brother Daniel was born on August 7, 1956, when I was 3 years old, my parents' American dream child while I was their refugee baby, born in a displaced persons camp in Forenwald, Germany, in 1953. Where I was serious, studying Talmud with my grandfather and calculus on my own, Daniel was charming, talking his way out of trouble and into opportunities he didn't deserve. Where I built companies and devices, He built houses of cards that collapsed at the first wind. Where I saved money obsessively, remembering my parents' stories of starvation, he spent it like it would spoil, like tomorrow was a guarantee rather than a hope. Daniel's failures were spectacular and numerous. In 1985, he started a real estate company that went bankrupt in 18 months, leaving investors $500,000 poorer and me $50,000 lighter after I covered his debts to keep him out of jail. In 1990, he tried day trading with money he'd borrowed from what turned out to be connected guys in Brighton Beach, lost everything in the crash of '91, and needed $100,000 from me to keep his kneecaps intact. In 1995, he became a restaurant consultant despite never having worked in a restaurant, bankrupted 2 establishments in 6 months, and needed another $75,000 to avoid lawsuits. Each time, I bailed him out, $50, $000 here, $100,000 there, eventually over $2 million across 30 years. Rebecca called it enabling, said I was preventing him from learning consequences. I called it family, remembered my father saying, "A brother is not a friend you choose but a burden God gives you to test your character." He's lost, not evil, I'd tell Rebecca after writing another check. There's a difference between being weak and being wicked. Is there? She'd ask. Because from where I'm sitting, they look the same when they're spending your money. But I kept believing Daniel would find his way, would wake up one morning and become the man our parents deserved, the uncle our never-born children would have loved. Even when he showed up to our father's funeral drunk. Even when he tried to sell our mother's jewelry while she was still in hospice. Even when he forged my signature on a loan application and I had to pay $200,000 to keep him out of federal prison. Family is family, I thought, and blood is thicker than water, though I was about to learn that blood is also easier to spill. The diagnosis came on July 8, 2023, a Saturday that started with what I thought was bronchitis that wouldn't quit. I'd been coughing for 3 weeks, bringing up phlegm that looked like rust, feeling tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. Rebecca, being a doctor, insisted on a chest x-ray, though she said it was probably nothing, maybe walking pneumonia at worst. The x-ray showed a mass in my right upper lobe, 4.3 centimeters, with irregular borders that even I, with my medical training, knew meant trouble. The CT scan showed 3 masses total, the largest 4.3 centimeters, 2 satellites at 2.1 and 1.8 centimeters, plus mediastinal lymph node involvement that meant it had already started traveling. The PET scan lit up like a Christmas tree, SUV values of 12.7, 9.3, and 8.8 respectively, when anything over 2.5 suggests malignancy. The bronchoscopy and biopsy confirmed non-small cell lung adenocarcinoma, stage IIB, technically inoperable but treatable with systemic therapy. Dr. Patricia Chun, head of oncology at Mount Sinai and someone I'd known professionally for 20 years, we developed a lung biopsy device together, didn't sugarcoat it. She sat across from us in her office that overlooked Central Park, autumn leaves just starting to turn, and gave us the numbers. Richard, with aggressive treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, immunotherapy, we're looking at a 23% 5-year survival rate. Without treatment, maybe 6 months, probably less given the lymph node involvement. 23%, I repeated. That's better than the Mets' playoff chances. This isn't a joke, Richard, Rebecca said, gripping my hand so tight I could feel her pulse. I know. But if I don't laugh, I'll cry, and I'm not giving cancer that satisfaction. Patricia, when do we start? Monday, if you're ready. Carboplatin and pemetrexed, every 3 weeks for 4 cycles, concurrent radiation after cycle 2, then maintenance immunotherapy with pembrolizumab if you respond. It won't be easy. You'll feel like death before you feel alive again. I've been married to a transplant surgeon for 40 years, I said. I understand suffering. Nobody laughed. Rebecca's hand went cold in mine. Rebecca's reaction to my diagnosis was textbook perfect. Too perfect, I realize now. She cried at exactly the right moments, held my hand during every consultation, slept in the hospital during my first chemotherapy infusion on July 10th, curled up in a chair that couldn't have been comfortable, wearing the same clothes for 3 days. She took immediate leave from the hospital, telling her chief, "My place is beside my husband," which should have been my first warning. Rebecca hadn't taken a sick day in 20 years, had operated with a 102-degree fever, had missed our anniversary dinner 3 times for emergency transplants. Now suddenly she was Florence Nightingale crossed with Mother Teresa? She researched treatment options obsessively, calling colleagues at Memorial Sloan Kettering, Maryland Anderson, Mayo Clinic, even reaching out to researchers in Germany and Japan. She created spreadsheets of clinical trials, success rates, side effect profiles. She hired a nutritionist who specialized in cancer patients, a physical therapist to maintain my strength, even a therapist to help with the psychological impact. She was the perfect worried wife, which is exactly why I should have been suspicious. Rebecca had never been perfect at anything emotional in her life. Daniel's response was more predictable but equally telling. He visited once during my first round of chemo, on July 10th, stayed exactly 15 minutes, I know because I watched the clock, and spent 12 of those minutes asking about my will. "Have you updated it? Made sure everything's clear? You know, to avoid probate problems." When I said I hadn't thought about it yet, he actually looked relieved. "Good, good. I mean, not good that you haven't, but good that you're thinking positively. You know, about beating this thing." He smelled like Armani Code cologne, $120 a bottle that he couldn't afford, and bad decisions made in expensive hotel rooms. The chemotherapy was everything Dr. Chin warned and worse, like being poisoned slowly by someone who hated you but wanted you to suffer first. Carboplatin and pemetrexed, the dynamic duo of cellular destruction, delivered through a port that felt like a foreign invader in my chest. Every 3 weeks, I'd sit in a beige recliner in a room with 15 other recliners, all of us connected to 4 poles like the world's saddest Christmas trees. The nurse, Maria, different Maria, this one from the Philippines, would access my port with a needle that felt like a harpoon, check my blood counts, and start the pre-medications: Zofran for nausea, dexamethasone for inflammation, Benadryl for allergic reactions. The carboplatin went in first, clear as water but feeling like liquid metal, cold and heavy in my veins. Then the pemetrexed, which looked innocent enough but made my mouth taste like I'd been sucking on pennies from 1943. The whole infusion took 6 hours, 2 hours of pre-meds, 3 hours of chemo, 1 hour of observation to make sure I didn't die right there in the chair. The first round, July 10th to 13th, I vomited for 3 days straight, bringing up things I'd eaten in 1987. I lost 12 pounds in a week. My hair started falling out in clumps, littering the shower like autumn leaves. The second round, July 31st, I couldn't feel my fingers or toes, peripheral neuropathy that made buttoning shirts impossible and walking feel like stepping on broken glass. By the third round, August 21st, I'd lost 40 pounds and looked like a scarecrow dressed in expensive clothes that no longer fit. But something kept me going, maybe stubbornness inherited from ancestors who'd survived pogroms and death camps, maybe spite at cancer thinking it could win, maybe just the Jewish genetic disposition to survive out of pure obligation to those who didn't. My grandfather survived Auschwitz, tattooed number 174517 on his arm. My father survived Bergen-Belsen, weighed 73 pounds when the British liberated the camp. I could survive some cellular rebellion and chemical warfare. Fuck cancer became my prayer, my mantra, my battle cry whispered into the toilet bowl at 3 a.m. It was during the fourth round, August 28th, that I noticed the first oddity. Rebecca was texting constantly during my infusion, smiling at her phone like a teenager with a crush. When I asked who she was talking to, she said, "Just the hospital, checking on my patients, making sure they're okay without me." But she'd taken leave. What patients? When I pressed, she said she was consulting on a difficult case, providing guidance to her replacement. It sounded plausible. Rebecca was devoted to her patients. But the smile was wrong. It wasn't her professional satisfaction smile. It was something else, something I'd seen before but couldn't place. The second strange thing happened during round 5, September 2nd. Rebecca said she had to attend an emergency transplant surgery, a perfect match liver for a 6-year-old that couldn't wait. She left me alone for the entire 6-hour infusion, which was fine. I'd made friends with Murray Goldberg, no relation, in the next chair, a retired accountant fighting pancreatic cancer with inappropriate Holocaust jokes and a flask of whiskey he sipped between nurses' rounds. But that night, when she came home at 11 p.m., she smelled wrong. Not like hospital disinfectant and surgical soap, but like champagne and expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5, which she never wore because it gave her headaches. Her dress, why was she wearing a dress to surgery? Had a small stain that looked like wedding cake frosting. How was the surgery? I asked. Successful. The child's doing well. Which child? What? You said it was a 6-year-old. Boy or girl? What was their name? She hesitated. Emma. 6-year-old Emma. Parents were crying with joy. I called the hospital the next day. There had been no pediatric liver transplant on September 2nd. The last one had been August 15th. When I confronted Rebecca, she said I must have misunderstood. It was a consultation about a potential transplant, not an actual surgery. Chemo brain, she suggested, was affecting my memory. Gaslighting, I realized later, was affecting my marriage. Round 6, September 11th, a date that already carried trauma, Daniel visited again. This time he stayed for an actual hour, which should have been my warning that something was wrong. He and Rebecca exchanged looks I recognized from 40 years of marriage. The kind couples share when they have a secret, when they're coordinating a surprise party or hiding a purchase or apparently planning a murder. He brought flowers, white roses that probably cost $100, which he'd never done before. They talked over me, around me, like I was already a ghost haunting my own life. At one point, Rebecca actually said, "When this is over, we'll need to handle things carefully," and Daniel nodded like they discussed what over meant and what things needed handling. They spoke in code, thinking I was too sick to decode it. The timeline is shorter than expected. The lawyers are prepared. The documents are ready. I pretended to sleep, the chemotherapy making it easy to look unconscious, and listen to them plan my aftermath. By round 7, September 23rd, I'd started recording everything on my phone. Call it paranoia, call it intuition, call it the survival instinct of someone who'd built a billion-dollar company by seeing patterns others missed and threats others ignored. I had a recording app that uploaded directly to the cloud, 3 separate cloud services actually, encrypted and password protected with codes even I could barely remember. Rebecca would step out to get coffee and be gone for an hour, returning with no coffee but with whisker burn on her neck. Daniel would call to check in, but really to ask about my treatment schedule, my prognosis, whether I'd considered getting my affairs in order, which is the politest way to ask someone when they're planning to die. Round 8, October 7th, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, was when the mask started slipping like a cheap Halloween costume in the rain. Rebecca forgot to hide her phone screen, and I saw a text from Daniel, "How much longer do we have to pretend? This is killing me." Her response, "Doctor says maybe 2 months. 3 at the outside. We can make it. Think about after." Make what? After what? But I was too sick to confront them, too weak to do anything but file it away with all the other oddities that were adding up to something terrible. Then came round 9, October 14th, 2023, the day everything shattered like a champagne flute thrown against a wall in rage. I'd just finished hour 3 of a 6-hour infusion. My blood counts were low, white cells at 2.3, platelets at 87,000, hemoglobin at 8.2, all numbers that meant I was barely holding on. Murray was telling a joke about a rabbi and a priest in chemotherapy when Daniel arrived, supposedly to keep me company but really to case my condition like a burglar checking if anyone's home. He was nervous, sweating through his $200 Thomas Pink shirt despite the aggressive air conditioning that kept the chemo ward at morgue temperatures. He carried a manila folder clutched like a life preserver in a storm, and his hands were shaking, not from emotion, I realized, but from excitement barely contained. Rebecca was there too, had been all morning, reading the New England Journal of Medicine but really watching Daniel, waiting for something, some signal or cue. They kept making eye contact over my head, like parents coordinating about Santa Claus, except I was the one who wasn't supposed to exist. "I brought you some papers to look at," Daniel said, pulling out what looked like financial documents, legal-sized pages with small print that swam before my chemo-fogged eyes. Just some stuff about, making sure everything's in order. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, living will. Standard stuff. But as he pulled them out, another paper fell, floating down like an autumn leaf if autumn leaves could destroy 40 years of marriage. It landed beside my chair, face up, impossible to misinterpret. He lunged for it like a linebacker going for a fumble, but chemotherapy hadn't destroyed my reflexes completely, just mostly. I grabbed it first, my neuropathy-numbed fingers barely able to hold it but managing through pure will and spite. It was a marriage certificate. The state of New Jersey, County of Atlantic, City of Atlantic City. Rebecca Sarah Winters Goldstein and Daniel Aaron Goldstein. Married September 2, 2023, at 11:23 p.m. The day she'd supposedly been in emergency surgery saving 6-year-old Emma who didn't exist. The day she'd come home smelling like champagne and wedding cake. The Borgata Hotel and Casino was listed as the venue. The witnesses were Martin Schlesinger, ESQ, her divorce lawyer I didn't know she had, and Kevin Wu, CPA, Daniel's accountant who'd been helping him hide money from the IRS for years. The silence in that infusion room was absolute, like the moment between when you cut yourself and when you start bleeding. Even the 4 pumps seemed to pause their mechanical breathing. Murray in the next chair actually said, "Oh shit," loud enough for the entire ward to hear. The woman getting chemo for breast cancer 2 chairs over gasped. The teenager with leukemia took out his earbuds to listen better. "What is this?" I asked, though the answer was obvious, written in black and white and state seal official. Rebecca went pale, then red, then pale again, like a traffic light having a breakdown. Daniel just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a goldfish suffocating in air or a man realizing he's been caught in something that can't be explained away. "Richard," Rebecca started, her voice cracking like ice under weight, "you don't understand." "You're right," I said, my voice steady despite the chemotherapy shakes that made my whole body tremor like a tuning fork. "I don't understand how my wife of 40 years married my brother while I'm dying of cancer. Please, explain it to me. Use small words. The chemos affected my comprehension of betrayal." "It's not what it looks like," Daniel stammered, sweat now pouring down his face like he was the one getting poisoned. "It looks like a marriage certificate." "Is it not a marriage certificate? Did New Jersey start issuing friendship diplomas?" "You were dying," Rebecca said quietly, all pretense dropping like a theater curtain after the show's over. "The doctors said 6 months maximum. The statistics for stage IIB. I know the statistics. I'm living them. Or dying them, apparently. Daniel and we fell in love. We didn't plan it. It just happened while we were both grieving you." "Grieving me? I'm sitting right here. I'm literally attached to and for. How are you grieving someone who's still breathing?" "You know what I mean. Anticipatory grief. It's a real psychological phenomenon. So is narcissistic personality disorder, but we're not diagnosing each other right now." Murray actually applauded. "Tell her, Richard. This is better than The Price is Right." "Sir, please," a nurse said to Murray. "This is private." "Private?" Murray shot back. "She married his brother while he's got cancer. This is like a telenovela but with Jews. I'm not missing this." Daniel finally found his voice, though he probably should have stayed quiet. "Richard, look, you're dying anyway." "Am I?" "Because I'm pretty sure dying people don't usually catch their wives committing bigamy." "It's not bigamy if..." "If what? If I'm mostly dead?" Only slightly alive? What's the legal threshold here? The will leaves everything to Rebecca, Daniel continued, digging his hole deeper with every word. We wanted to make sure it was protected. From taxes and stuff. If she remarries after you die, there are tax implications. Taxes and stuff, I repeated. You married my wife for tax purposes. That's your explanation. You committed fraud for a tax break. It's more complicated than that, Rebecca said, tears starting that I no longer believed were real. No, I said, folding the certificate carefully, precisely, like it was made of plutonium. It's actually quite simple. You two decided I was already dead, so you might as well start celebrating. How much champagne did you drink at your wedding? How many toasts to my upcoming demise? Did you have a cake? Did it say congratulations on your impending inheritance? Nobody toasted your death, Daniel protested. What did you toast then? Your patience? Your restraint in waiting 6 whole weeks after my diagnosis? Your creative interpretation of in sickness and in health? Rebecca stood up, gathering her purse, her journal, her dignity that had fallen somewhere near the floor. We're leaving. We can discuss this when you're more rational. Sit down, I said quietly, but with the tone I'd used to fire executives who'd betrayed me. Both of you. Sit down or I call security and have you removed, and then I call the police and report fraud, bigamy, and conspiracy to commit murder. Murder. Daniel's voice cracked like a 13-year-old's. Nobody's murdering anyone. Aren't you? I have stage IIB lung cancer. Stress is literally deadly for me. You think maybe finding out my wife married my brother might be stressful? You think maybe that could kill me? That's attempted murder by induced cardiac event. They sat. Even Murray sat, and he wasn't even standing. Here's what's going to happen, I said, the chemotherapy fog lifting as rage provided clarity better than any stimulant. You're both going to leave. You're going to go home and wait. And in exactly 72 hours, not 71, not 73, exactly 72, you're going to understand what you've actually done. You're going to understand that I'm not dead yet, and when I am, you won't get a penny. Not 1 cent. Not $1. Nothing. Richard, Rebecca started. Get out. Now. Or I start screaming, and believe me, a cancer patient screaming about betrayal gets a lot of sympathy, a lot of security, and a lot of lawyers. They left. Daniel forgot his folder, which I kept. It contained draft powers of attorney making him and Rebecca joint decision-makers for my health care, living wills with DNR orders that would prevent resuscitation, and a document transferring all my assets to a trust they controlled. The trust documents were dated July 9th, the day after my diagnosis. They'd been planning this from the moment they found out I was sick. The marriage was just the evolution of a conspiracy that started the second Dr. Chun said, cancer. Murray looked at me, pulled out his flask, and poured whiskey into my apple juice. You need a lawyer? I need several lawyers. I need an army of lawyers. I need lawyers who have lawyers. My son's a partner at Cravath, Swain and Moore. Michael Goldberg. Want his number? Yes. But first, I need to make some calls. The first call was to my lawyer, Stephen Weinberg, who'd handled my company's sale to Johnson & Johnson and every major transaction of my life since 1987. He answered on the first ring, even though it was Saturday. Steve, I need you to do something unusual. I need to disappear $87 million in 72 hours. Make it vanish like a magic trick, like it never existed. Richard, are you having a reaction to the medication? Should I call Dr. Chun? My wife married my brother 6 weeks ago while I'm in chemotherapy. I have the certificate in my hand. Silence. Then, I'll have the entire team assembled in an hour. How vindictive do you want to be? Biblical. Old Testament. Sodom and Gomorrah. Salt pillars. The works. That's my favorite kind. We'll need forensic accountants, international tax lawyers, trust specialists. This is going to cost. I don't care if it costs $10 million. I want them destroyed. Only $10 million? Richard, you're not thinking big enough. Give me 72 hours and unlimited resources. I'll make them wish they'd murdered you instead. The second call was to David Kim, a forensic accountant who'd helped uncover fraud in 3 companies we'd acquired over the years. He specialized in finding money people thought was hidden and hiding money people thought they'd find. David, I need a complete audit of my wife and brother's finances. Every transaction, every account, every penny they've touched in the last 5 years. Time frame: 48 hours. That'll cost. I don't care what it costs. I want to know if they bought a pack of gum with my credit card. I want receipts for everything. If they breathed near my money, I want to know what it smelled like. Give me 24 hours. 48 is for amateurs. The third call was to Dr. Chun. Patricia, hypothetically, if someone in my condition stopped treatment, how quickly would they decline? Richard, you can't stop treatment. You're responding well. The tumors have shrunk 30%. I'm not stopping, but I need people to think I am. Can you help me? She paused. What did Rebecca do? How did you know it was Rebecca? Because you'd only do something this stupid for betrayal, and she's the only one you'd never expect it from. Also, I saw her at the Borgata on September 2nd when she was supposedly in surgery. She was wearing a wedding dress. You saw her? And didn't tell me. I thought it was a costume party. It was Atlantic City. People do weird things there. She married my brother. While I'm dying. Jesus Christ. Okay, yes, I'll help. What do you need? Papers saying I'm refusing further treatment. Prognosis of weeks, not months. Make it look hopeless. Done. I'll backdate them to today. Richard, are you going to be okay? I'm going to be better than okay. I'm going to be vindicated. And then I'm going to be cured. Out of spite, if nothing else. The next 72 hours were the most productive of my life, which is saying something for a man who built a billion-dollar company from a kitchen table prototype. While Rebecca and Daniel waited for me to die or capitulate, sweating through their sheets and checking their phones every 12 seconds, I dismantled my entire financial existence and rebuilt it in a structure they could never touch, never find, never even understand. Stephen's team of 16 lawyers created 17 different trusts in 5 different countries: Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Singapore, Luxembourg, and one in South Dakota because apparently South Dakota has the best asset protection laws in America. Who knew? The main one, the Goldstein Family Medical Research Trust, contained exactly $87,493,221.78, my entire liquid net worth down to the penny. The catch? It could only be accessed for medical research into genetic diseases that affected Ashkenazi Jews, particularly the BRCA mutations that had killed my mother and 3 aunts. If I died, it would be distributed to 17 different research institutions, each getting a specific amount for specific research. Lung cancer research got $10 million, because irony should be funded. Pancreatic cancer got $15 million, for Murray. The house in Westchester, worth $8.3 million, was donated to a foundation that would turn it into a hospice for Holocaust survivors, a place where they could die with dignity, speaking Yiddish if they wanted, eating kosher food that tasted like home. The apartment in Manhattan, $12 million for 3,200 square feet overlooking Central Park, went to Mount Sinai for a new chemotherapy ward to be named the Solomon Goldstein Cancer Center, after my father. The house in the Hamptons, $15 million with beach access and a pool Rebecca had never used because she didn't like how she looked in a swimsuit anymore, became a retreat for cancer patients and their families, a place to remember what life was like before diagnosis. Every piece of art, the Rothko that hung in our bedroom, the Basquiat in the living room, the Chagall that reminded me of my grandmother's stories, was donated to museums with the stipulation that they be displayed, not stored, so people could see them, be moved by them, maybe forget their troubles for a moment. Every car, including the Bentley Rebecca loved and the Tesla Daniel had been eyeing, was sold, the proceeds going to the trust. The yacht, which we'd used exactly twice, was donated to a charity that takes disabled kids sailing. But the masterpiece, the thing that made Stephen laugh until he cried, was the Rebecca and Daniel Goldstein Restitution Trust. I put $1 million in it, but they could only access it by admitting, in writing and publicly, to their betrayal, their fraud, and their conspiracy to steal from a dying man. The admission would be published as a full-page ad in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Journal of the American Medical Association. They'd get $50,000 a year for 10 years, enough to survive but never thrive, enough to remember but never forget. David Kim's audit revealed the depth of their betrayal went back years, not months. They'd been stealing from me since 2019, small amounts at first, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, always just under the amounts that would trigger alerts. Rebecca had opened 7 different accounts in banks I'd never heard of, moving money like a shell game. Daniel had been buying cryptocurrency with my credit cards, thinking it was untraceable, not knowing that blockchain is literally a permanent record of every transaction. Together, they'd stolen $847,000 before I even got sick, which meant the cancer wasn't the cause of their betrayal, just the opportunity to accelerate it. They'd also been monumentally stupid. Rebecca had used her hospital email, her official NYU Langone email address, to send Daniel love letters that would make a romance novelist blush. Graphic descriptions of what they'd do with my money, with my houses, with their lives after I was gone. One email, dated July 10th, the day I started chemo, read, "My darling Daniel, soon we'll be free. Richard's diagnosis is a gift from God. We can finally be together without guilt, with the resources to live as we deserve. The cancer will do what we couldn't, set us free." Daniel had posted photos on Instagram from their Atlantic City wedding weekend, geotagged at the Borgata, time-stamped during Rebecca's supposed emergency surgery. Pictures of them in wedding attire, champagne glasses raised, with the caption "New Beginnings." He'd set his account to private, but forgot that my company's IT director, whom I'd made rich, followed him and screenshotted everything. They'd used my American Express Black Card for the honeymoon suite at the Borgata, $3,500 a night for 3 nights, room service totaling $2,400, champagne that cost $800 a bottle. The wedding itself, according to the receipts, cost $47,000, including a ceremony on the casino's rooftop, a reception for 50 guests I didn't know they had, and a wedding cake that said "Finally" in gold leaf. Murray's son Michael turned out to be not just a partner at Cravath, but a specialist in criminal fraud with connections in the U.S. Attorney's Office. He reviewed everything and rendered his verdict. This is wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and possibly attempted murder if we can prove they were hoping the stress would kill you faster. They're looking at 15 to 20 years each, federal charges, no parole before 10. Attempted murder might be hard to prove, I said. Is it? I have an email here from Rebecca to Daniel dated October 12th saying, if we increase his stress, it could accelerate things. The shock might be enough. That's conspiracy to commit murder by induced medical event. In New York State, that's attempted murder in the 2nd degree. Will it stick? With a sympathetic jury? A 70-year-old Holocaust survivor's son with cancer whose wife married his brother? They'll be lucky if the jury doesn't recommend the death penalty, which New York doesn't even have anymore. On October 17th, exactly 72 hours after the confrontation, I invited them to dinner at the house. I told them I wanted to discuss things rationally, maybe come to an understanding, find a path forward that worked for everyone. They arrived together, in the Mercedes S-Class I'd bought Rebecca for her 60th birthday, wearing clothes I'd paid for, checking phones that were still on my family plan. I looked the part of a dying man. I'd stopped shaving for 3 days, Let the chemotherapy exhaustion show in my posture. Even had a makeup artist friend from my company's marketing days add subtle touches. Shadows under the eyes, a grayish pallor, the slight yellow tinge that suggests liver involvement. I coughed frequently, sometimes bringing up fake blood I'd hidden in my cheek, corn syrup with food coloring that looked disturbingly real. They relaxed visibly, seeing what they expected, a dying man too weak to fight, too tired to care, too close to death to matter. I'd prepared dinner myself, their favorite foods, Rebecca's beloved cocoa vin that took 6 hours to make properly, Daniel's favorite roasted vegetables with the herbs from our garden, the challah I'd baked using my mother's recipe, her hands guiding mine from beyond. One last supper, I thought, before the resurrection they didn't see coming. "Thank you for coming," I wheezed, each word seemingly an effort. "Of course," Rebecca said, reaching for my hand. I pulled it away, slowly, like it took all my strength. "I've been thinking about your situation," I continued, pausing to cough dramatically. "And I've decided I understand." Daniel leaned forward eagerly, greed making him stupid. "You do?" "Yes. You're in love. Love makes people do crazy things. Who am I to stand in the way of love? I'm dying anyway. What's the point of fighting?" They exchanged glances, not quite believing their luck, like lottery winners suspicious of the check. "So I've made some changes," I said, pulling out a thick folder that looked official because it was. "First, I've stopped treatment. Dr. Chun says I have maybe 3 weeks. No point prolonging the inevitable." Rebecca actually smiled before catching herself and rearranging her face into concern. "Second, I've restructured everything to make it easier for you. No messy probate, no fighting over assets. It's all in trusts now." "Trusts?" Daniel's voice cracked with concern. "Yes. The Goldstein Family Medical Research Trust contains the liquid assets, all $87,493,221.78. They both leaned forward. "It's designated for medical research into genetic diseases affecting Ashkenazi Jews. Specifically, the diseases that killed our family in the camps when they couldn't kill them with gas." Rebecca went white. "What do you mean, medical research?" "Oh, didn't I mention? None of it goes to you. Not a penny. Not a cent. Not a fraction of a fraction. The house you're sitting in? It's being converted to a hospice next month. The Manhattan apartment? Already transferred to Mount Sinai. The Hamptons house? It's a cancer retreat as of yesterday. The art collection? Donated to 12 different museums this morning. Your car, Rebecca? The one you drove here? It's being repossessed tomorrow at 9 a.m. "You can't do this," Daniel stammered, sweat pouring down his face like he was melting. "Already done. Irreversible. Signed, sealed, notarized, filed with the state." "Oh, but I did create something for you. The Rebecca and Daniel Goldstein Restitution Trust. $1 million, available to you on one condition: you publicly admit to everything. The marriage, the theft, the conspiracy, the attempted murder. Full-page ads in major newspapers. Then you get $50,000 a year for 10 years. Enough to live in a studio apartment in Queens, shop at Costco, take the bus." "This is insane," Rebecca said, her physician's composure finally cracking. "I'll contest it. No court will uphold." "Actually, they will," said Stephen Weinberg, entering from the kitchen where he'd been waiting, recording everything. "Everything is perfectly legal. I have recordings of you discussing stealing from Richard, emails planning his death, evidence of fraud going back 4 years. You could contest, but then all of this becomes public record, and you'll both be arrested." "Arrested?" Daniel squeaked. Michael Goldberg entered from the dining room, looking like the federal prosecutor he used to be. "Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, attempted murder by induced medical crisis. We have enough evidence to convict you both. 15 to 20 years, Federal charges. No parole before 10. But, I said, coughing for effect, I'm feeling merciful. Maybe it's the cancer, maybe it's knowing I'll be dead soon, but I don't want you in prison. I just want you gone. I slid 2 more documents across the table. Divorce papers for you, Rebecca. And a restraining order for you, Daniel. Sign them, leave tonight, never contact me again, and you avoid prison. Don't sign, and Michael here calls the FBI right now. They're actually waiting outside. We weren't sure which way this would go. Where will we go? Rebecca asked, tears streaming down her face, real ones this time. We have nothing. You have each other, I said. Isn't that what true love is about? Or was it only true when you thought it came with $87 million? They signed. Of course they signed. When faced with prison or poverty, criminals always choose poverty, thinking they can scheme their way back to wealth. They signed with shaking hands, Daniel actually crying, Rebecca looking like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. As they stood to leave, I had one more gift. Oh, Rebecca? Your colleagues at NYU received an interesting package today. Your emails to Daniel, discussing how to kill me faster. You've been terminated, effective immediately. Your medical license is under review. And Daniel? The IRS got a tip about your cryptocurrency purchases. They'll be in touch. Also, that woman you've been seeing in Miami? She got copies of everything too. Turns out she's married to a very jealous federal judge. They left in silence, Rebecca crying, Daniel looking like he might vomit. I watched from the window as they drove away in the Mercedes they'd have to return tomorrow. They'd driven away with nothing but each other and the clothes on their backs, which technically I'd paid for too. Stephen looked at me. You know you didn't have to destroy them so completely. Yes, I did. They tried to kill me, Steve. Maybe not with a gun or poison, but with stress and betrayal and hope that cancer would finish what they started. They're lucky I'm letting them walk away. Murray called an hour later. How'd it go? They're gone. Good. Listen, Richard, I have a confession. I don't have pancreatic cancer. What? I'm a retired federal judge. I volunteer at the cancer ward to keep an eye on things, make sure nobody's taking advantage of vulnerable patients. Been watching your wife for weeks. She was practically measuring you for a coffin while you were still breathing. Why didn't you say something? Wanted to see how you'd handle it. You did good, kid. Real good. Your parents would be proud. You fought back without becoming them. I'm 70. I'm 83. You're all kids to me. Listen, you want to get dinner when you're feeling better? I know a place that makes brisket almost as good as your mother's probably was. How do you know my mother made brisket? You're a Jewish man who built a medical empire and just destroyed 2 people who betrayed you with biblical precision. Your mother made brisket. The next morning, October 18th, the news broke everywhere. Someone, definitely not me, probably not Stephen, definitely Murray, had leaked the story to the press. Prominent NYU transplant surgeon marries brother-in-law while husband fights cancer. The medical community, which is smaller than a shtetl and twice as gossipy, had Rebecca tried and convicted by lunch. The hospital had to hire security to keep reporters away. 3 patients requested different surgeons. The medical board opened an investigation into ethical violations. Daniels was over by dinner when the IRS raided his apartment and found not just cryptocurrency but evidence of tax evasion going back a decade, fake receipts for business expenses that didn't exist, charitable donations to charities that were actually casinos. Turns out when you steal from your dying brother, you forget to declare it as income. When you win at casinos using his money, you forget to pay taxes. When you lie about everything else, why would taxes be different? They tried to claim the $1 million from the restitution trust, but that required the public admission. They drafted one, sent it to Stephen, but it was too vague, too self-serving, full of excuses and explanations. Full admission, Stephen reminded them. Every crime, every betrayal, every detail, no excuses, no explanations. Or nothing. They chose nothing, which meant they had exactly nothing. Rebecca moved in with her sister in New Jersey, sleeping on a couch in a one-bedroom apartment in Fort Lee, applying for jobs at urgent care clinics that wouldn't hire her once they Googled her name. The New York medical community has a long memory for scandal, and marrying your patient's brother while the patient has cancer is the kind of scandal that becomes legend. Daniel moved to Florida, where he got a job selling timeshares to retirees in Boca Raton, the only industry that didn't care about his past as long as he could close deals. He was good at convincing old people to give him money, after all. But here's the beautiful part: I didn't die. The chemotherapy I was supposedly stopping? I continued it with newfound determination. Rounds 10, 11, 12, each one easier because rage is apparently an excellent anti-nausea medication. The radiation therapy Dr. Chen recommended? 28 sessions that burned like focused sunlight, but also burned away the tumors. The immunotherapy with pembrolizumab? Experimental but effective, teaching my immune system to recognize cancer cells like my brain had learned to recognize betrayal. By December, the tumors had shrunk by 60%. By February 2024, 85%. By May, no evidence of disease. Dr. Chun called it remarkable. I called it spite medicine. I celebrated my recovery by sending Rebecca and Daniel a photo from Mount Kilimanjaro's summit, which I climbed in June 2024 for my 71st birthday. 19,000 feet of altitude, 5 days of climbing, one 71-year-old lung cancer survivor giving the finger to everyone who thought he'd die. The message read, "Still not dead. Still have $87 million you'll never touch. Still haven't forgiven you. Never will. Enjoy Florida and New Jersey. I hear they're lovely this time of year if you can't afford air conditioning." Rebecca responded with a 12-page email about forgiveness, second chances, how illness had confused her judgment, how Daniel had manipulated her, how she'd always loved me, how she'd made a terrible mistake. I had it framed and hung in my bathroom, where I read it every morning while shaving and laugh. It's better than the comics. Daniel sent a letter through a lawyer threatening to expose family secrets if I didn't give him money. I sent back copies of his emails discussing my murder, the FBI's case file on his fraud, and a note saying, "Try me." He hasn't contacted me since, though I heard through Murray's connections that he's been married and divorced twice in 3 years, each time to older women with money who figured out his game before the wedding. The houses I donated are serving their purposes beautifully. The Westchester House has hosted 47 Holocaust survivors in their final days, dying with dignity in rooms that smell like halal and sound like Yiddish, surrounded by people who understand that some numbers on arms never fade. The Manhattan Apartments' new chemotherapy ward has treated 3,000 patients, each one sitting in chairs bought with my money but not my anger. The Hamptons Retreat has given hundreds of cancer patients a week of peace by the ocean, remembering what life was like before cells rebelled. The $87,493,221.78 in the medical trust has funded breakthrough research that makes my betrayal worthwhile. One study, on genetic markers for lung cancer in Ashkenazi Jews, identified 3 mutations that could lead to early detection, possibly saving thousands of lives. Another, on trauma's effect on genetic expression, is revealing how the Holocaust changed its survivors' DNA, passing down resilience and damage in equal measure. My parents, who survived the camps to die of cancer in America, would be proud that their suffering led to understanding. I'm 73 now, cancer-free for 3 years, though I still get scanned every 3 months because cancer, like family, can return when you least expect it. I live in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, not far from where my father sold furniture to black families when white stores wouldn't, teaching me that money doesn't see color but morality does. I volunteer at Mount Sinai's cancer ward every Tuesday and Thursday, sitting with patients during chemo, telling them jokes Murray taught me, holding their hands when the poison burns, being the family that shows up instead of stealing. When they ask if I have family, I say, I have the family I choose, not the one that chose to betray me. Murray and I have dinner every Thursday at a kosher deli on the Lower East Side that makes brisket almost as good as my mother's. We're writing a book together, How to Survive Cancer and Relatives, a guide to chemotherapy and litigation. We're on Chapter 12, When to Call Oncology and When to Call the FBI. Last month, I got word that Rebecca and Daniel's marriage had been annulled. Apparently, marrying your brother-in-law while he's dying of cancer isn't legal in New Jersey. Who knew? She's still living with her sister, working at a CVS Minute Clinic for $22 an hour, treating sore throats and sprained ankles instead of transplanting organs. He's still in Florida on his fourth wife. This one's 82 and has dementia, which should worry her children if she had any who cared. The marriage certificate they carelessly dropped that day? I had it framed in museum glass, archival quality that will last centuries. It hangs in my apartment next to my clean CT scans, my parents' wedding photo from the DP camp, and my Nobel Prize. Oh, did I not mention that? The Goldstein Foundation's research into genetic markers for cancer in Holocaust survivors' descendants won the Nobel Prize in Medicine this year. I accepted it on behalf of everyone who survived genocide only to die of cellular rebellion, who passed down damaged DNA and unbreakable spirits, who taught their children that survival is the best revenge, but revenge is pretty good too. In my acceptance speech in Stockholm, I thanked my parents for surviving, my company for building, my cancer for teaching me who my real family was, and Rebecca and Daniel for showing me that sometimes the people who try to kill you do you the biggest favor. I didn't mention them by name, but everyone knew. The video has 12 million views on YouTube. The comments section is brutal. Murray says the best revenge is living well. I say the best revenge is living at all when people bet against you, thriving when they expected you to die, and donating $87 million to charity just to watch them realize they'll never touch it. Every morning, I wake up in my Brooklyn apartment, check that my lungs are still clear, check that my $87 million is still helping people who deserve it, and smile. Then I make coffee, good coffee, $30 a pound Jamaican Blue Mountain because I can afford it and they can't, and read the news on my iPad, looking for Rebecca and Daniel's obituaries not because I want them dead but because I want to outlive them. I'm Richard Goldstein. I'm 73 years old. I survived the Holocaust by proxy, built $1 billion company from a kitchen table, beat stage IIB lung cancer through spite and chemistry, and destroyed 2 people who thought love meant money and marriage meant murder. The cancer might come back. Statistics say it probably will. 5-year survival is 23%, and I'm going on 4. But Rebecca and Daniel? They're never coming back. They're stuck in their small lives, their small apartments, their small dreams of money they'll never have, while I'm giving away millions to strangers who need it more than family who didn't deserve it. That's not just revenge. That's justice. That's poetry. That's what my grandfather, with numbers on his arm and ice in his heart for those who betrayed him, would call perfect. The only thing that would make it better is if they lived forever, healthy and poor, watching me give away money until the sun burns out. But I'll settle for outliving them by one day. Just one. Long enough to know I won. Thank you for listening to today's story of justice served ice cold. Look at your screen right now. Look at your screen now. There are 2 more videos. Both will restore your faith in karma. Hit the notification bell. Tomorrow's story will shock you even more. Remember, respect your elders, or become the next cautionary tale.